Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We will get started in just a little bit. We're so excited you're here with us today. And we have a few slides as you're waiting for us to get started. People are still joining. So welcome, welcome. And let us know where you're calling in from. We'd love to hear that so that we can get a sense of who's on with us today, since we can't see all your lovely faces. But welcome to the webinar. We've got, San Diego, we've got Maryland, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. Great to see everybody. Florida, Texas, all over. Fairfax, Virginia. Still have another minute and a half. Keep letting us know where you're calling in from. So happy to see you all. At Kentucky and Colorado, Kansas, West Virginia. Ooh, we might have every state here, which is very exciting. Elio, welcome from Mozambique. Glad you could be with us. Elio is a Mandela Fellow with NAA. We're so excited you could join. Give everybody another minute to keep joining. And we'll get started in literally 1 minute. Hi, everybody. Put your name and where you're calling in from and anything else in the chat that you want us to know. It's nice to see all of you. See a lot of friends. Such a great group today. And you are all in for a treat. Thanks, everyone, for letting us know where you're calling in from. We've got so many places represented around the world that are here today. So welcome to all of you. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover and so much great content today. Welcome to all of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Judy Browse. I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And I am so thrilled that all of you are here with us today for the webinar. And we're really excited about the topic and especially about the speaker. As you know, this is all about environmental justice and the future of environmental education. And we couldn't have a better presenter than Parker McMullen Bushman. And I'll introduce her more fully in a minute, but I'm just so thrilled that she could be with us today. And Parker will be talking about how all of us can be diversity change agents and how we can use the power of education to create societal change and show the connections between sociocultural injustices, environmental issues, and education. And I just wanted to mention that NAA is committed to supporting equity, justice, inclusion, and accessibility. We try to do that in everything that we do. We're all learning like the rest of you as we move through this world. We learn things every day, and webinars like this help us all learn more about what we can do both as individuals and organizations to create change. And I encourage all of you to visit our JEDI resources on the NAAA website, and many were compiled with input from all of you. So thank you all so much for all of that, but we are always updating that. And for those of you who are new to our webinars, we do our best to bring new ideas, insights, great speakers to help move the field forward. And we appreciate all the suggestions that you give us for the topics that we should cover. And just as a heads up, next month we have Craig Freshley, who's talking about really practical tools for how we can make collaborative decisions together. And I encourage you to join us next month. I also want to thank the U.S. Forest Service, an amazing, amazing partner. Together, we have been launching these EE Inspire webinars to, again, bring new ideas to all of our networks. And we couldn't do it without Rachel Baer, who is environmental education specialist and a leader in environmental education. Rachel, thank you for all you do. Thank you for being here. And I also want to thank our affiliate co-hosts around North America who are doing environmental education at the state, regional, and provincial affiliates. Thank you all. And if you don't know who your affiliate is or not involved, please get involved and join this amazing network. And also a big thank you to EE360 Plus and US EPA for their support of the webinar series that allows us to bring in speakers like Parker. So excited about that support. I know that you all use different platforms and many of you know Zoom, but for those of you who aren't familiar, just remember all the auto lines are muted because we have so many people, which is exciting, but talk to us through the chat. You can hit all panelists, or you can send a note to everyone. You can send ideas, resources, questions in the chat. As Parker is speaking, please feel free to put questions in, and Ann and I will monitor that and make sure we answer as many as we can. You'll get a copy of the recording and the chat after the webinar, so don't worry about trying to take a million notes. We also are really happy that we have live captioning for anyone who needs help with the audio. You can just hit captions and you'll be able to see the captions, and it might help if you have audio issues. And then I also want to thank Ann Umali for her support. She is our webinar guru. She is incredible and has helped support our webinar series from the start. And Ann, thank you so much. When she's not doing webinars, she is our Director of Professional Development, which is a part of, and the manager of EE360 Plus. So thank you, Ann, for all that you do. And now I am so honored to introduce our speaker today, Parker McMullen Bushman. Many of you know Parker, and you know that she is one of the most talented conservation and educational professionals in the field. She is also an executive with a passion for equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice. She has more than 24 years of experience in environmental education, conservation, nonprofit, and outdoor education. And she is a dynamic and compelling leader with a demonstrated ability to inspire and catalyze organizational change. Parker is also a great friend of NAAEE and helped kick off the 2020 annual conference. She also helped lead the Equity and Inclusion EE Pro discussion group. She took part in a thought leaders meeting to plan for the future of the field, and she's currently an advisor of EE360 Plus. She's also the Chief Operating Officer of Inclusive Journeys and founder of Eco-Inclusive Strategies. And she'll tell you more about all of that, but you'll soon find out she's a dynamic speaker and facilitator, and she's going to help us figure out how we can all be better change agents. I will say she has this passion for equity and inclusion that helps us all think about what more we can do, especially in outdoor spaces. Her interest in justice, accessibility, and equity developed from her personal experiences facing the unequal representation of people of color in environmental organizations, as well as in green spaces. So she tackles all this head on and helps us all think about it. And at Eco-Inclusive, she supports the creation of healthy and diverse organizational and community ecosystems. And as she said, the basic principle of ecology is that diversity in an ecosystem fosters strength and resilience. And her vision is a world where people are free of the impacts of discrimination and systemic oppression. She has a huge history, you can see here, of amazing jobs before she started Eco-Inclusive. She's won many awards and accolades. She was a Together Green Fellow, highly prestigious fellowship. In 2022, she received the Rosa Parks and Grace Lee Boggs Award for Outstanding Service from NAAEE. And that award recognizes individuals who take a leadership role in educating and promoting action to support environmental education and environmental justice. So Parker, you've done so much to help us all address systemic racism and build a better world. Thank you so much. And I'm now going to turn it over to you. Welcome, and let's give her a warm virtual welcome.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. And man, I'm loving Zoom is coming with the new features like these hearts and hands are, that's amazing. I feel more like I'm there with you all. So thank you so much for being here today. And I am so excited to chat with you. Today, we're going to be talking about environmental justice and the future of environmental education, and really how these two overlap, right? That's what we're going to be discussing today. And Judy did such a great job telling you about my background. So this first part should be pretty easy. My name's Parker McMullen Bushman. My pronouns are she, they. I'm coming to you from the traditional, ancestral, and current homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute Nations here in Denver, Colorado. I always like to start off by telling groups a little bit about me and my background and history. How did I come to this place? During our presentation today, I'm going to start off by telling you about me and my lens for this work. We're going to talk a little bit about what environmental justice is and how it ties into environmental education, also how racial justice and social justice tie in, and try and leave you with some tips and ideas for how you can work this into your daily work out in the field. So to start off with, I'll tell you a little bit about my education. I got my master's in natural resources from University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. I had a focus on environmental education and interpretation. I like to say that I wear a number of different head wraps. I am the CEO, as Judy's already said, of Eco-Inclusive Strategies. It is a consulting org that works primarily with conservation-based orgs around issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, so on and so forth. I am the COO of the Inclusive Guide. It is a tech startup. If you asked me, 10 years ago when I was leading kayaking trips on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, if I would be running a tech startup, I would have told you you didn't know who you were talking about, but I am. And Inclusive Guide is a website that's like Yelp, where people can rate places and spaces, everything from your local park to your dentist's office, on how safe, welcome, and included they feel in relation to their identity. And then we give feedback to businesses about that. I am the founder of Summit for Action, which is a yearly summit where we talk about how do we move out of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion into action around that work. You can also find me on social media under the handle Queen Work. I use my platform. Queen actually stands for Keep Widening Environmental Engagement Narratives. And I use my platform to provide representation for plus size folks of color in outdoor spaces, but to also talk about the social justice issues, racial justice issues that are related to the environment. I also sit on a number of local and national boards. I have had a 24-year career working in environmental education, outdoor recreation, and natural resources. I've had the opportunity to work in sites all over the United States, and it's been wonderful. But along my journey, along my way, people often asked me, how did I get here? Like, how did you become an environmental educator? And it wasn't a malicious question. They were wondering how they could replicate it, right? It also wasn't a silly question because I worked on teams like this where I was the only person of color. And being in that environment, I started to wonder as well why I didn't see a whole lot of people like me. And could it be that I didn't, that other people who looked like me didn't care as much about the environment? I realized that my path into this was very different than my colleagues. I had never had a camping trip with my parents in the summer. I'd never gone to a national park until I was well into my 20s. And so, I often, at that time, I started to think about my own background and how I came to this work. You see, I grew up in the Bronx, New York. And I'm sure if you look at these pictures, you would think that, this isn't a place where a naturalist is born, maybe, because we definitely have kind of thoughts about what it means to live in urban environments in comparison to more remote environments. But even though I grew up in the city, and even though I didn't have the experience like the national park, like going camping, I still had experiences in the outdoors. It still was important for my parents to get me into outdoor spaces. And being in the outdoors helped me to learn about my environment. Now, when I first started out in my career, I didn't give much credence to my experiences that I had in the city, because everything that I was seen or shown said that if you were a naturalist, if you were an environmentalist, then that meant that you spent a lot of times in these kind of far off wilderness areas. And so I didn't think that my background in the city qualified. But the more I started to deconstruct my past, I realized that I learned very important lessons during my time in that urban environment that definitely have an impact on my work today. And as I explored the city, I got some of my biggest environmental lessons. I would walk for miles with my father collecting aluminum cans throughout the city. And we would have a big shopping cart that we would push around. And it wasn't necessarily because my dad was concerned about recycling. He wanted to collect the cans so that we could turn them in for money, right? But during that time, I learned about recycling. During that time, I also learned about the different things I was seeing in my neighborhood. You see, in my neighborhood, the trash was often on the ground. We would have to pick the cans out of the different litter that was already on the sidewalk. When we went to nicer neighborhoods, I noticed that we had to dig through the trash cans in order to get those cans out, because they had more readily available trash cans. They had people who were cleaning up their areas. And I remember getting not only a sense of place during these excursions, but starting to care about my neighborhood. And I started to bug my parents a little bit. I remember going to my mom several times and asking her what we could do about the trash that we were leaving behind. And my mom, I don't know if she was trying to get me off her back or what, but she one day flippantly said, "Why don't you write a letter to the New York Times?" And I did. I wrote this letter to the New York Times. And you can see that as a 9-year-old, I was very passionate. "Dear people, we are polluting our earth," right? I had a passion that would kind of lay there for years before finding my environmental education path. But this is a bit, I now realize as an adult how lucky I was to have a mother who challenged me and encouraged me to my first bit of environmental activism. I often think about this, and I think about my mother and that first time of me kind of putting my voice out there. I think that it's really important in two different ways because one, we often tell the story that children in under-resourced urban environments aren't connected to any environment and don't care, right? We have that kind of bias there. But it's not true. These children are seeing and taking on information, but not every child has an adult that gives them the power to process that information. And the power of teaching young children about their environment and giving them the skills to process their information and have a voice is immense. These skills give children the ability to have agency as an adult, right? But not every child gets that early connection, and not every child gets a connection between what's going on in the environment around them in their neighborhood and what they can do about it, right? But that is what environmental justice is, and that's what I want to really dive into today, because in the last 3 years, we've been learning more and more about the disparities that plague our nation through unheard voices, through people that maybe have not had a platform in the past. We've been learning about racial disparities, structural inequities, impacts of bias, and the relationship of power and privilege. But the conversation about how these injustices relate to the environment and conservation can sometimes be confusing, right? And how does it relate to our everyday work? How can environmental education better embrace environmental justice to foster a critical understanding of the environment within the context of human, political, and social action? Today, I want to talk about those connections between those social, cultural inequities and the environmental issues and the power of environmental education to make that change. So let's start off with the basics. What is environmental and climate justice? Well, we know if we look worldwide, we have some countries and populations that have benefited more from industries and from technologies that cause climate change and environmental harms. And at the same time, the countries that have benefited the least from these industries and technologies are more likely to be suffering first and worse because of the climate crisis. Things like our dependence on fossil fuels has unequally benefited the richest countries while disproportionately impacting the poorest and most vulnerable people around the world. And so environmental justice is the fair treatment of everybody across the board. Environmental and climate justice is that principle that the benefits that are reaped from activities that cause the climate crisis and the burdens of the climate change impacts should be distributed fairly. And if they were distributed fairly, I think people would think differently about what we have to do to make change. Climate justice means that countries that became wealthy through unrestricted carbon emissions have the greatest responsibility to not only stop warming the planet, but also to help other countries adapt to the climate crisis and climate change and develop economically while not with non-polluting technologies. When we are talking about environmental and climate change and its relationship to social and racial justice issues, there's a few different things that we need to acknowledge. One, environmental inequities and climate change interact with and overlap with one another, and it worsens the existing inequities that we have in our society. These inequities are often shaped by racism. Solving these issues require us to take an intersectional approach, and that takes into account what are the different things that the most impacted communities are dealing with. And most of us have already know that scientists, environmentalists, and racial justice advocates agree that one of the best ways to overcoming the climate crisis is by empowering and listening to Indigenous communities around the globe. So now that we have this framework, I want to take a sharp turn here by making a pretty bold statement. But I'm going to ask you to stick with me on this ride in the next few slides, because I don't just believe that there is a small relationship between social justice issues and the environment. I believe that racism is killing the planet. Environmental protections, I think we can all agree, should not be distributed based on the color of your skin. But all across the planet, we have sacrifice zones where we allow the environment and the people in those areas to be sacrificed to industry and pollution. And we often ignore and turn away from deprioritizing those injustices because of the people that live in those areas. And this might be conscious or unconscious, but it is happening. And in the United States, we can see how these racial disparities are playing out. In the US, we know that diversity, racial diversity, is transforming our nation, right? We are a multicultural society. And in this year, more than half of all children will be minorities. So half of all people 18 and younger will be minorities. We also see that over time, we've had changes in our demographics. And those changes are continuing. Soon that change will be over half of our society at all ages. And so we have to consider, if we know our demographics, then who is affected by this should be equal across those demographics, right? But when we examine racism and structural inequities, environmental racism becomes very clear. Environmental racism is that inequitable distribution of environmental hazards based on race. And for example, it's been known that communities of color are systematically targeted for disposal of toxic waste and the placement of this country's most hazardous industries. So Robert Bullard, Dr. Robert Bullard, who's known as the father of the environmental justice movement, has done a ton of research around this. And what Dr. Bullard found was that race was a bigger predictor on if you were going to be located next to a toxic waste or hazardous industry. It was a bigger predictor than even socioeconomic status. So people who were middle-class Black were more likely to be located next to these hazards than very poor white folks, right? And so we are starting to realize, and we're seeing all of these institutional and structural racism that is happening with us. And this structural racism pertains to the practices that institutions do that support racism. So it's not just individuals. And for a long time, if you have been following this conversation for a long time, like this isn't a new conversation, right? We had the civil rights era, we had eras before that, but during this conversation, some of the definitions have changed. And when we used to talk about racism, we talked about, oh, okay, that was individuals. Those were the people who were doing horrendous things like burning crosses on lawns, right? But as we have seen the data and as we have had more and more conversations, what we are realizing is that racism has been built into a lot of our systems, everything from housing to education to criminal justice systems. And the reason that we know it is because we can look for not only equity and opportunity or equality and opportunity, but equity and outcome. And that's where we fail, right? We fail because of that legacy of racism. We fail to show the equity in outcome. Legacy racism is when the effects of past institutions leave a racial or ethnic group in a disadvantaged social position. So even though we have gotten rid of a lot of policies that we can kind of point to that say directly impact people, not all of them, but a lot of them, right? We still have the effect of that. It does not go away, right? An example might be, we talk about, oh, we are getting rid of sexism and we are making our world, we're bringing up the pay rate for women. We are doing all of these things, but that history of misogyny, of sexism is still there. I still go in line with my husband to buy, let's say, dinner at Chipotle. I will pay with my credit card and I will have the person behind the counter hand it back to my husband, hand the credit card back to my husband, right? Because we still have it built into things. We had 3 different kids in 3 different states. When me and my husband got married, we both changed our names. So my last name is McMullen Bushman. I'm the McMullen. He's the Bushman. He also changed it. On each of our kids' birth certificate, it asks for mother's name, a mother's maiden name, and it asks for father's name, right? So it asks for my name before marriage, but it does not ask for my husband's name before marriage because they didn't give credence or think about a man changing his name after marriage, just a woman doing it, right? So even though we say that we are breaking down these systems, we are breaking down things like racism, sexism, it's still embedded into the way that we operate every day. And that legacy is still with us. And we can see it in the numbers. When we talk about equity in equality and opportunity and equity and outcomes, we can see that even though people of color are set to be the national majority in 25 years, they fall statistically behind in representation in not only leadership spaces, but in almost every other measure of well-being and success in the United States, right? And when we look at environmentally, we see that we don't all breathe the same air. Right? There have been studies that show that people of color are exposed to 46% more nitrogen dioxide pollution every year than white people. And because of that, we have things like asthma, we have things like coronary heart disease in higher levels, right? And so I think that it's really important to think about the ways that this shows up. And I'm seeing a question in the comments. Someone says, I didn't understand the last point. What was the point of what a man's name is when going on a birth certificate? So my point was that me and my husband both changed our last names. And on the birth certificate, they think of the maiden name with a woman, because when a person goes into government databases, they are searching for, your mother's maiden name. You want to do an ancestry, and search your mother's line, you would search her maiden name. But the thinking is that a man would not change his name. So we would just leave that name the same, father's name, but mother's maiden name. But if because they weren't thinking that my husband would change his name, which is, why wouldn't he, right? Men can change their name as well. So it is a leftover of that kind of thinking that only a woman would do this, but a man would not. In addition to us not all breathing the same air, we've also seen things like people who are creating pollution are not the ones that are suffering from it, right? And so a study in 2019 saw that pollution was disproportionately caused by white Americans through their consumption of the goods and the services that they use. But the pollution is disproportionately inhaled by Black and Hispanic Americans. So even though when we think about, I talked about people of color experiencing kind of falling behind in all levels of well-being, economics is one of those levels. And economics, right, says who can purchase things, who can buy things, who has the money to spend. And that puts, even here in the United States, us at different ends of, who is using their money to buy resources and who is on the other end of suffering from the pollution created by those resources. So we don't necessarily have to think of it on a global scale because we see it happening right here in the United States. And so to me, this gives that saying, and you all have probably heard the saying over the last few years of "I can't breathe," a whole nother meaning, right? A whole nother level. Because when we think about, who is suffering from the pollution that we see in our nation, we have a tie between, our social side and our environmental side. This statement of "I can't breathe" was the final words of Eric Garner. And Eric Garner, this became a rallying cry. The autopsy that happened after Eric Garner's death revealed that asthma and heart disease were cited as contributing factors, along with the obstruction of his breathing that triggered the deadly asthma attack. And when I think about that, when I think about the slides that we just saw about who is most impacted by asthma, when I think about the area that I grew up in the Bronx, my hometown, Bronx, New York, I was at the center of research around pollution in New York and its effect on the children in that area. And when we think about the fact that Eric's environmental justice issues, asthma and heart disease, came head up against the socioeconomic and racism issues that he also faced in his life and caused his death, right? When someone says "I can't breathe," they are really saying that they are lacking something essential to life. When we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I don't know how many of you have seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but we know that breath is life, right? And Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a theory in psychology proposed by Abraham Maslow that states that there are 5 categories of human needs that dictate an individual's behavior. Those needs include, our physiological needs that are at the bottom. And you can see that the first one there is air, right? Is breath, is life. And then we have our safety needs, our love and belonging needs, our esteem, self-actualization. And so if someone is unable to make their physiological needs, cover their physiological needs, they have to have those covered before they can move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if they're not able to cover their physiological needs, they might do something that you would consider unsafe. Like, I don't have shelter, so I am sleeping under an overpass. There are many of us that would consider that unsafe, right? But if someone can get their physiological needs taken care of, then they can do their safety needs. and they can get a job. They can look for their personal safety. If their safety needs are taken care of, they can look for community, friendship, love, intimacy. If that's taken care of, then we look for esteem. I want to do well in my job. I want to get awards. I want to get recognition. And once we get at that point, then we can get to our self-actualization needs. Self-actualization is our need to leave the world a better place, is our need to leave a legacy behind us. And when we are talking about saving the planet, that is a self-actualization need. So we have to think about that, because in environmental education, we are often trying to get people to take care of the earth, trying to get them to take care of the planet, right? We want that as our major goal. But we sometimes don't realize that people are telling us, I can't breathe, right? I can't deal with my day-to-day. How am I to deal with the self-actualization need of saving the planet? So to me, this is the clearest link between why social justice issues are tied to our want, our desire to help others save the planet. Because we have a whole group of people that cannot even turn their eyes toward that because they're so focused on their survival needs. So we have to be willing to acknowledge these disparities, right? And it's a balance between acknowledging these disparities and staying hopeful enough, saying, you know, in it enough to want to make change around those disparities. But we have to name them. We have to understand the disparities that plague the systems of our countries, not to put the blame on someone, but because when we're able to name the issues, we can start to change the issues, right? We need to advocate to be able to change these issues. So what does that look like? This is why this conversation has been galvanized in the last 3 years by the 2020 protests, and why they're so important. These issues of race and disparities are important to environmental education work because people are not separate from their communities. People are not separate from their lived identities. And these issues matter to them. And processing these issues are important to our students and important to their development. When someone says, I can't breathe, they're saying they're lacking the essential function to live, right? And so we want to really think about what is the future of environmental education in this world that is changing and grappling with oppression. Because even though oppression is deeply rooted and embedded in our culture, the good news is we already have a framework for dealing with these issues. And as environmental educators, we are uniquely positioned to help deal with these issues. Environmental justice is so important to us. The environmental and climate justice movement go hand in hand with environmental education. The environmental justice movement was started primarily by people of color who wanted to address the inequities of environmental protection services in their community. And the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was held in October of 1991, where more than 1,100 activists attended. And this included 300 African Americans, Latino, Native, and Asian Americans from every one of our 50 states. Right? And that during this process, they created the 17 principles of environmental education. Anne's going to drop the link to the 17 principles of environmental education into the chat, because I am always surprised when I talk to groups that there are people who haven't heard of the 17 principles of environmental education. And it is a blueprint for us as environmental educators. And one of the most important of the 17 principles is this one, that there is a call for the education of present and future generations that emphasizes social and environmental issues based on their experiences and with an appreciation of their diverse cultural perspectives. As environmental educators, it's our job to support young people, to provide safe spaces for them, and in many cases, to help them understand how they can bring their voices and experiences into the public realm to solve public problems. Our role as educator is to listen and act in partnership with the people that we are educating, and to help them, those who are most impacted by environmental problems that society creates for them. That's the core of environmental education, to help participants process information, to help them understand that they have power, they have strength, and they can change the world. Our youth are the center of these issues, right? They are the generation coming behind us, and they care. This generation, more than anyone else, they care and they want to see change. Environmental education in the community that we've created, the community of you all out there listening, right? That community is about thinking differently. And it's about creating solutions in environmental and STEM education. It's about building sustainable communities, and it's about youth empowerment. And so we can support youth as they help us to find a solution, because it's our youth, I really believe, that are going to bring some of the most impactful solutions. They think differently, and they have the power to reimagine a societal structure that is different, right? And we can help them, and we can help them support that. So what are some things that you can think about in your work? I'm gonna go through these quick so we have some time for questions. One is, make sure that you are creating a clear understanding of the history and systems of oppression and the ways that it relates to your work. So this is going to require some research on your side, right? But I've given some examples, and there's so many more out there. And can you understand, in the places that you live, place-based education, can you understand the environmental impacts that are affecting the place that you live and the place from the people that you are educating live, right? In order to move these conversations forward in our personal lives and professional lives, we have to have that clear understanding of history, of systems of oppression, and how they continue to work together. And this is a great time for educating ourselves. We need to learn to reframe how we talk and think about conservation and sustainability, right? Who is celebrated as sustainable, and how is that biased? I think about my grandmother and my father, who were my first teachers about the environment, and they didn't have formal education around it, but my dad taught me about recycling because he was collecting cans to take back for money, but no one ever praised him for recycling. My grandmother used to wash all her clothes by hand, hang them up on the line, right? She used to reuse everything. Everything had a third, fourth, fifth life, right? Because we didn't have the money to spend on additional resources, but no one ever told her that she was saving the planet. My uncle, who rode a bike to work 30 miles every day because he couldn't afford a car, no one told him he was a long distance biker, that he was lowering carbon emissions, right? Those things, we have to reframe how we talk to people about what they do, because a lot of folks that are in the lower socioeconomic level have not been told that they are a part of this conversation too, and that they are already doing actions that tie into this work. We need to learn proactive responses. So learn responses to injustice and be willing to address incidents of bias, discrimination, exclusion, and then apply that learning to larger platforms within our community. We need to build community alliances. Building our community in this time is so important. And the people that are here listening today are a part of your community. Building community alliances is about working together, giving and receiving support, creating sounding boards for anti-bias planning and practices. And we need to also allow our community members to hold us accountable as we are learning, and to hold us accountable for dismantling inequities in our policies and in our practices. And we need to understand that this is about solidarity, not charity. I challenge you to think about this not as only helping people that are struggling during this time, but also examining systems that got us here in the first place. Also, you need to realize that these systems, even though you might be somewhere near the top, right? Maybe you are not as affected. These systems affect you too. We all know about pond ecology, right? Pollution in one corner of the pond eventually is going to affect the whole pond. And just because you're a macroinvertebrate that has a higher tolerance for pollutants, right? It doesn't mean that eventually that polluted pond isn't going to affect you as well. So we need to have an understanding that this isn't about, oh, saving those poor people over there. This is about saving all of us. And we need to do this work like our lives depend on it, because it does. So the disparities that I've talked about should also serve to remind us that environmental education is an act of social justice. You are already doing this work, and it involves these values, these vision. You are instilling the habits of thinking and shaping how we live. The work of an environmental educator is to nurture within people the will to go towards empathy, ecological consciousness, engaged inquiry, collaboration. And these things are also what help build up equitable communities. And so you're doing the work, right? And it is so easy to then think about how the work that you're doing contributes to this bigger conversation about social justice issues. Education is known as the great equalizer, but this promise of equality cannot be achieved when fundamental injustices exist within our communities. Some of the greatest acts of social justice, therefore, are needed in education, are needed in teaching. With an increasingly diverse population, successful environmental education leaders will be those who are actively engaged in issues involving race, class, gender, identity, sexuality, and ability. And this time that we're living in is monumental. Moments such as these can amplify, can lay bare structural inequities, but also these moments give us the ability to rise up, right? This is a brave new world, and we can create spaces where everyone can breathe. We need to think about what is the opportunity that we have before us, because I think, and I know that you all are doing great work, and I know that this can go along with the great work that you're doing. So I want to thank you all for this time, and I guess we'll take some questions. We'll take some questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share.
So Parker, thank you so much. That was truly amazing, and I'm so glad we have it recorded. We did have a question. If you could just say a little more about intersectionality. We hear that word all the time. How can environmental educators think about that in a way, and any resources you want to suggest for folks?
Yeah, intersectionality is about our ability to understand how our different identities layer on each other and cause different experiences, right? And so when you have a group, let's say you're working with a group of students and you've got diversity within your group, the way that the students understand your message and are impacted by your message can be impacted by their different identities. Also, when we talk about environmental justice, right, and environmental issues like climate change, intersectionality is we want to think about, because not everyone experiences it the same way. So if we are looking to create a solution, let's say we are looking to create a solution for people with disabilities that are having to deal with some climate issues, in an area of the United States. We not only need to take into consideration how a person's disability might affect how they come to the conversation, but also how a person's race overlaid with their disability might create a bigger pain point for them, right? So if we know in the United States that people with disabilities have the highest rate of unemployment of any other minority group, and we were to solve for just that, we would be missing out on the fact that people with disabilities who are white have higher rates of unemployment than people who are Black with disabilities. And if we just solve for people who are white, we might end up missing out on something needed to make people who are Black with a disability also as successful.
Thanks, Parker. And I don't know if you saw the comment, somebody wants another hour to keep here. And then another person mentioned definitions. And one of the things NAAE has done, our team, is trying to define the words that are meaningful for us, that we're all talking the same language. Anne, I think you had another question.
Yes, there was some interesting comments in the chat, Parker, when you were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw some of that, and some of the comments about where his observations came from and the appropriations.
Yeah, definitely.
I wonder if you have
That's
some comments about
that's a whole nother conversation. But
yeah, that's if we had another hour.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs definitely was appropriated from indigenous tribe, and actually in that appropriation he changed kind of the way that they had it set up, which kind of puts the way he lays it out on its head. So I think it's important to acknowledge where that knowledge originally came from, right? And it was like most of our knowledge from indigenous folks.
And thank you for that, Parker. Related to that comment, Brittany Thompson also had mentioned that it can sometimes be easier to care about the environment when your primary needs are met, but one doesn't necessarily have to come before the other. And there are many individuals who lack those primary resources who still care and act. And so just thought if you had any comments about that too, that it's not necessarily a linear process.
Yeah, I think that there are people who are able to, because they gain an understanding that the environmental issues are tied to some of their primary needs, right? So I know I live in Denver. We have here one of the most polluted zip codes in the United States in Globeville, Elaria, Swansea. And some of the people who are doing the most important work around that are the people who are most affected, who have the least amount of time to give to that work, who are suffering the most, but they have seen the direct correlation between their health, right? Which health, breathing, whatever is that base level, and they are able to so they're fighting for it, but not everyone in their community can see that, right? Because they are so focused on fulfilling those base needs. So yes, it is much easier once you have gotten to the top, right? But what I would say is, in the way that we frame things as, oh, a feel good, care about the planet, right? That is that higher, and I'm forgetting the different levels, but that is the highest level. I would argue that people who are at the, my kids are dying from asthma, right? And when I come out, there's a yellow film on top of my car, and I have to send my kids to the hospital every other week, are still thinking about those physiological safety needs, which are lower down.
So Parker, there are a couple other questions in the chat. What we might do is see if you would help us answer those, and we'll post them on EE Pro, on the EE Pro Equity and Inclusion discussion group. And since the time is run out, I cannot thank you enough. I'm going to turn it over to Ann to close us out. But Parker, thank you for all you do for all of us, and keep doing it. You are fantastic, and we learn something all the time. Thank you so much, and I hope you're watching these hearts come up the side.
I see them. Thank you so much. It really
And take it away.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Parker. So much to learn. And I feel like we're just getting started in this conversation. So yes, we will add some of these questions to EE Pro. So come find us on EE Pro and continue the conversation. I want to send everybody off with just a few reminders. Everyone's going to get the webinar recording and our webinar notes sent directly to your emails. And if you want to find it, you can go to EE Pro, the same exact site you went to register for today's webinar. And you may have noticed that EE Pro looks a little bit different now. We have a brand new interface with fun EE profile avatars and new EE Pro group features and so much more. So check it out while you're there. It's a lot easier to share and post content. So we hope you can do that a little bit easier. Also, while you're there, I invite you to see all of our EE webinars that we've been doing for 7 years now. We've got recordings and notes and slides from so many different speakers. And if you've got a spare hour, a free afternoon, I invite you to check it out. So much great stuff there. And we'll also be having Parker's stuff on there very soon. One more note about equity, justice, and diversity resources. Judy mentioned this at the top of the webinar. If you head over to our website, you'll see that we've got a ton of resources, especially for educators. And this is a curated list of different types of equity and inclusion resources. And we've got a number of different topics. We've organized it by different themes, like, for example, if you run an organization and are trying to think about exercises and work you can do as an organization, there's some exercises that you can do if you have some personal anti-racist growth work you're looking for. And if you have a family and you have kids and you're looking for activities you can do with children, there's stuff here for you. And we're always looking for more to add. So let us know if you have a favorite resource, we can add it. This list is always growing. One last thing to mention, we do have a webinar lined up for next month, February 15th. We'll be with Craig Freshley, and he's going to talk all about what it means to have collaborative group decision-making. So join us February 15th. We're also looking for a number of volunteers that want to be a part of our live audience, that feel comfortable being on camera, sharing their face, and also sharing their stories for different group decision-making challenges you've had, but also different strategies that have worked for you. We want to pick that apart and share you with the wider EE network. So let me know if you're interested in being a volunteer for our live audience. Just send me a note, ann@NAAA.org, or complete that section in the registration for that webinar. And then lastly, if you ever want to be in the know of everything and anything that's going on at NAAA, I invite you to follow us on your favorite social media platform and sign up for our free EE newsletter. It comes out every 2 weeks, and you'll find out the latest news about what's going on in the EE space, as well as all of our most recent webinars. And that is it from me. Thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Parker, for an amazing hour. We will continue this conversation on EE Pro. All right, so thanks again, and we'll see you all soon. Take
Thanks,
care, everybody.
Nina. Thanks, Parker. Thanks, everyone. Rachel, thank you so much. Wait, I need to get a heart in there too.
Yes, same. More hearts. Take care, y'all.